This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast. Hey, School Success Makers. Welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater, and I'm joined by a new friend out of hot Austin, Texas, Chuck Evans, and he is the founder and senior partner of BetterSchools LLC. He's been doing that for a while, and he's going to share all the great things that he has done to help schools and how schools can be better. So I'm excited for you guys to hear this episode today. But before we jump into that and I pass it off to him, I do want to highlight our amazing sponsors over at America's Christian Credit Union. You guys have heard this spiel before. They're amazing, but they have this year been celebrating 65 years of service, and they have doing some amazing things in the education space. And one of those specifically is providing essential school banking services and a tuition financing program for schools who are looking to reduce their risk and administrative burden. So the short of it is this, guys: if you are a Christian school who has parents paying you, which I'm assuming you do, and you have a hard time collecting all of the funds, or you're having to chase families all year round to try and get those funds, they take that off of your plate. Those families can go get a tuition financing loan from the bank, and then they can pay the credit union every month like they would just a regular loan. But you as a school would get your money up front, so you don't have to worry about chasing people all year round, and you can put more of your time, money, and resources into your students that are under your care. It's an amazing resource, and it doesn't cost your school anything. So go check them out online, americaschristiancu.com/schools. That's americaschristiancu.com/schools. All right, y'all, it's time to jump into today's episode. So I'm actually going to pass it off to Chuck to introduce himself. So Chuck, welcome to the podcast today, sir.
Thanks, Mitchell. It's great to be here with you. Our group is called BetterSchools LLC. We were founded in 2011. Prior to that, I was an executive consultant and scholar at large with IDEA Incorporated, based in Stony Brook, New York, working with my good friend and mentor, D. Bruce Lockerbie. And prior to that, I was the head of school and leading schools in Virginia, North Carolina, and then here in Austin, Texas.
Love it, man. Well, as we dive into the nitty gritty of the content, I guess before we do that, I always ask the same question. If I was to visit Austin, Texas, and to come see you, what would you say? Mitchell, you got to do this to enjoy the full Austin experience.
Tacos.
All right. Where at?
Tacos. It's just about any place. We've got some great Tex-Mex restaurants down here, some of which have developed into national chains like Chuy's, but it's still just as good as ever. Maudie's is another favorite, but there's just tons of great Tex-Mex plus interior Mexican food. Everybody's got tacos, of course, and breakfast tacos. You can't pass them up.
Love it. I've only been to Austin once, and it was beautiful. Just like what I saw, and I love the rolling hill area that I was in. was gorgeous. And I can't remember the food I specifically tried. Oh, you know what I did try? I just remembered. I don't know if it's based there, but this is where I first had it. It was a Papados restaurant, which was my first time there in Austin. And oh my gosh, I love Papados, but I'm pretty sure they're probably not based there in Texas.
They're based in Houston.
Oh my goodness, they are. Okay.
Yeah, they're based in Houston, and they've got, it's a big chain in Texas, and they have the Papados seafood, they have Papa's steaks, they have, other seafood that's not Cajun seafood places, as well as Papacitos for Tex-Mex. Yeah, they're all over the place.
Oh my goodness. Well,
can't go wrong at any of the Papa restaurants.
Okay, well, good to know the next time I'm over in Texas. Well, although I know they have some across the country too in other states, but
yeah,
I digress.
Run into them in airports too from time to time.
Okay, perfect. So I'll be able to get them another time. So, all right, so jumping in, I'd love to jump right in. Obviously, you shared your background really quick, and you and I kind of communicated with this before we started recording, but we typically start talking about the challenges that schools are facing and kind of what are those and what is a way that they can combat those challenges. And you shared a really specific one that I'd love to just kind of digest a little bit from you, but first, like, share kind of what you've seen on the inside of these schools that you've been consulting and working with.
Well, one of the things that we do as a group is to provide interim leadership for schools that are in a leadership transition. So right now, I'm just starting my 10th interim head of school position at a school near Houston. And we also do a lot of strategic and financial planning with schools. And I would say the challenge that we run into most consistently in schools is their ability to provide access to the school through competitive pricing, as well as to use need-based financial aid, as well as employee discounts to provide access and to build some measure of socioeconomic diversity in the schools. And it's just very few schools, or at least a good number of the schools that we have worked with have a hard time figuring this out. And so if you do it poorly, you can end up running, deficits and almost not even know it, because you're just handing out, you're handing out discounts to employees, or you're overextending yourself in need-based tuition because you don't have a good budgeting process. Or you could also end up not just with deficits, but under resourcing the whole enterprise and all of the things that your mission depends on in terms of quality of staffing and your ability to compensate the right people and over time. So it's a thorny issue, and it's one that we encounter in just about every school that we engage with.
So if a school is currently having this problem, is there a way that they would know that? Like they could self-analyze really easily to do that? Or is it something they need to really bring in somebody from the outside to kind of call it out if it's something that they see?
It depends on the quality of their accounting, usually. So it used to be common practice for schools not even to show employee discounts, and maybe not even need-based financial aid on their books. In their regular financial reporting. They just sort of said, well, that's just money we didn't collect, so we're just going to account for the money that we have. That's less common than it used to be, thankfully. But for the schools that still are not super accurate on accounting for that cost, where it will show up eventually is in cash flow shortages. So you just start running out of money in the fiscal year earlier and earlier and earlier. And before you know it, your whole, the school's whole financial future is potentially in jeopardy. And we've encountered that with schools, that have not been keeping careful track of the employee discounts, especially. It's a great perk, right? You go to teach at a school, you're not going to be paid probably as much as you might in public schools. You don't have, quite as good benefits, but your kids can go to school with you either for free or at a significant discount. And that's a huge benefit. But if schools are not keeping track of the cost of that, then it's just an uncontrolled expense, and it's unaccounted for, and it'll come back to bite you.
And what's the solution for this? Is it a simple like, oh, we just need to, is it raise our tuition, or we need to make sure our accountant knows that we make sure we know what we're doing here with the money side of things? Is there a simple solution? Maybe that's the easier question.
Well, I mean, the technical solution is, the second thing, the latter, making sure that you have a really solid, competent accounting office that understands basic independent school economics and is disciplined in that accounting and in the quality of reporting. The more complicated solution is just figuring out how to balance your gross tuition to your net tuition, and making sure that the amount of revenue per pupil is sufficient to provide all the things that you're promising in your mission and your vision and on your website, in your admissions process, all of that. So that's where it gets more complicated. And so there's no one size fits all solution, but there are some basic practices that we've seen schools utilize in order to bring those elements more into balance and to have a better sense of control over those things. If you back up a little bit, one of the reasons that this is difficult for schools is because they often start, especially younger schools, they often, or parochial schools too, they often start with two conflicting premises. That number one, they want their price point to be at an affordable level where kind of a typical, maybe middle income family with one and a half, household incomes, can afford, tuition for maybe two or three children. They also want at the same time socioeconomic diversity. And what schools find out over time is that you can't really have both. That you might have a price point that seems affordable for a typical family, but what does that really mean? Because affordability is a relative thing. So there are families who, let's say your tuition is $10,000. There are families maybe in your school who could afford $20,000, and there are families in your school potentially who can't afford $500 a year. So that quest for affordability is a relative thing. You also run into there the inevitability of tuition having to increase, and this is partly or mostly because 60 to 80% of the cost of an independent school are in people, right? We're paying teachers, we're paying staff, and the longer they're with us, the more expensive they become. Now, even if you're just providing, cost of living increases year after year for the last 20 years, that would have been about 3% a year, right? But in the last 2 years, it might be 5, 7, 9% a year, depending on, which rate of inflation you're attaching to. And so the only thing that can happen is for that to drive tuition up at a rate that is almost inevitable. So those starting premises are really important. And then the second aspect of that is that schools have a hard time coming to terms with is that, and it's a basic principle that I learned from Bruce Lockerbie years and years ago, is that not everyone should receive a discount just because they say they can't afford it, or just because they are employed. And our basic kind of hardline premise is you never give a discount to someone who doesn't need it, whether they work for you or not. And so just sort of indiscriminately handing discounts or aid to families who could afford full tuition also undermines. But a lot of our business models are based on that premise that you come to work for us and this is part of your compensation. And so we help schools to kind of wean themselves off of that expectation, usually over time, because it is baked in and it's part of the deal, right? It's part of the commitment that you made to your employees. But freeing up more of that revenue over time so that you have actually more revenue to or more funds to provide to need-based families who qualify for need based on their household incomes, their adjusted gross income on their tax forms, whatever, usually determined by a third party. And that's where you get your socioeconomic diversity, right? It's also important to keep in mind that when we say socioeconomic diversity, typically what we're thinking is middle to lower income families, but that's not the full definition, right? Socioeconomic diversity also should include higher income families. That's real diversity. And so if we are, artificially underpricing, and a family looks at that family who can afford $20,000 looks at our $10,000 price point and compares us to the $15,000 price point with absent other information or absent some other insight into the school, their immediate conclusion might be, well, how can they be a $15,000 quality school, what they're promising for $5,000 less, right? Mm-hmm. And so higher price point is often what you need in order to get full socioeconomic diversity across that whole spectrum. And that's the counterintuitive element of independent school economics that kind of blows people's minds when you start talking about it.
So I've heard of this, and I don't know if this is specifically what you're kind of getting into with this one, but the schools that there's a specific term, there's a name for it, but like where you charge let's say $25,000, and then 95% of your families get financial aid because you got to come in, you go to this high point. And so somebody who's like you're mentioning, oh, I can pay that. But then somebody who maybe can pay 15 and then somebody can pay 10, and you like have this sliding scale based on income levels. Is that kind of what you're getting into? Because I know schools do something similar to that. Is that what you're talking about?
That's sort of a new way to label tuition assistance. I mean, in most schools, it works the same way as a traditional approach, which is everybody, applies to FACTS or FAST or TADS or whoever it is, whatever the third party is. And then if you call it a sliding scale, you call it index tuition, you call it whatever you call it, it still gets sort of doled out in the same way based on how families qualify. What we typically find in a healthy school is that a school with a healthy aid program and a good balanced net tuition revenue system is that about 25 to 30% of the families will be on some form of financial aid. It might be from 90% all the way down to maybe 10 or 15%, right? And the percentage of the budget that is going to tuition assistance is going to, and this is just a coincidence that we keep running into. I can't prove this out empirically, but it keeps popping up over as many years as we've been doing this. The percentage of budget that's going to tuition assistance is probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of your highest tuition. So if your highest tuition, say, is $15,000, you're going to typically find about 13 to 15% of your budget in order to support that 25 to 30% socioeconomic, lower middle to lower income socioeconomic diversity is going to consistently over time need to be allocated. And so that's what we try to help schools do when we're doing financial modeling with them, is to get patterns established so that they're not overspending on tuition assistance, but they're not underspending because now they're able to use need-based tuition assistance, especially as a way to either grow enrollment or to keep enrollment or to stabilize enrollment and to maintain that sense of diversity within the community.
Dang. Okay. All right. This is making more sense to me now, because I could see that. I mean, I would assume every school really should have somebody come in and at least assess it, at least to know if they're in line. Am I right in saying that everyone should probably have at least an assessment done for that?
Yeah, it can help, especially if you're overly dependent in your compensation model on employee discounts for starters, and you can kind of see that in terms of the percentage of your overall families who are receiving some amount of aid, how many of them are employees, and how many of them are qualifying based on their employment or just are qualifying based on need. And so just getting a sense of that for someone who does this a lot to come in and take a look at it and tell you whether you're in or out of balance can be really helpful.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think that's definitely a challenge, as we mentioned. Any other challenges that you would mention in this section before I jump into the other section to talk about?
Oh man, there's so many challenges. Mitchell, I say this all the time, and because I get to present on this, and I teach a couple of classes on this too in graduate programs. I say this over and over again. School is a bad business. If you're going to go into business and you want to do something that is scalable and easy to make it profitable, don't do school. Do something else. It's noble. It's necessary. We have to have it, but from a business model standpoint, it's just its own animal, and it's hard to make it good.
And that's why there's people like yourself, myself, other partners I have. We're all about helping the schools, because it's not an easy ordeal what they're doing, but I commend them. I respect them because it's a lot they got on their plate for sure. And hopefully this podcast, they can take a couple of different things from each episode that are like, okay, I'm gonna make it better using this resource or an idea maybe they never even thought of before. Because I feel like it's also one of those things, this goes into like other facets of our life, but you're doing one thing and you think it's going great, and maybe it is going great in our standard, but somebody comes in and goes, well, have you thought about this? Or did you ever think about this? Kind of like what you're talking about. where somebody goes, oh my gosh, I actually I never did think about that. And then boom, now you're even better because there's just one thing you were just had a blind spot. You didn't see it. Not that anything was going wrong, but it's like now you're going to be even better. And I kind of see that as just one of those areas. Like every school should have somebody on the outside come in, whether it's, my team going in and let's look at how your marketing's doing. Let's look at how your enrollment process is going, and somebody like yourself coming in and talking about what you're mentioning, like having those outside people come in and give an actual good feedback because we just care. We want to help these schools is so incredibly valuable. And so as we're talking about the challenges, I would love to, 15 minutes of that. Let's talk about what's going great. Let's talk about what's like going awesome. Have you got any cool, quick, like a win story of schools you've been working with, or just something that you were like to applaud, I guess, a school that you're like, man, the school's doing some really amazing things and here's what they're doing?
Well, I mean, we love schools. I mean, this is one of the only reason we do this is because we love schools. The other reason is I don't know anything about anything else. This is what I've been doing since 1991. So, but we love schools, and if you back up about 15 years, it was a really scary time for schools. So coming off of, on the tail end of the Great Recession, there were schools shutting down all over the place. There were large Christian school associations that in the space of just like 5 years lost 20% of their schools. And so it was a really, really frightening moment, not just for schools, of course, it was for everybody, but this is the world that I live in. And I think one of the cool things that we've seen, and ironically, COVID actually, I think, has helped this more than not, is that the number of private schools since that calamity back in 2009, 10, 11 is expanding, and the number of kids in private schools is growing. And while there were some schools who weren't already well prepared or weren't fiscally or culturally stable prior to COVID that were detrimentally impacted or were forced to close, most of the schools that we interact with actually benefited, both in terms of enrollment, in terms of strength of community. Certainly, their technology capabilities were, super improved. And so as hard as that was, and even sometimes as acrimonious as it was in the schools that we were working with, because there were so many things to disagree about, right? Coming out of that, I think most of the schools that we're working with have come out stronger, and they've come out with stronger enrollment. They've come out with stronger sense of commitment from parents and families and even teachers. We haven't seen the mass exodus of teachers from education in private schools like we have in public school. And I think we just did it better. And that it wasn't just the technology. It really wasn't just, the fact that we were more agile. Private schools tended to get back in person learning quicker than a lot of public schools. I think a lot of it had to do with strength of community and the bonds that people already had to one another. And when you're a part of an independent school or parochial school community, if that school's doing it right, it's not a transactional relationship that you have with that school. It's a commitment to mission. It's a commitment to one another. And I think if anything that we've learned coming out of COVID is that strength of community matters more than anything else. And the continuity and authenticity of culture in a school that forms that community. I just think, we knew it before, but I think it was easy to take for granted. And then you go through that fire, and you come out on the other side and you're like, oh, wow, look what we have here. And I think that's the most exciting thing that we've been seeing over the last, couple, 3 years.
And I would agree with that. I think about bring it to the church level, just the church community we have around us. Like there's a culture there, and there's a sense of family. And I know that would also carry over to schools, specifically, obviously, Christian schools that would have that. And that's, that's so incredibly valuable. I mean, people want to be a part of a family. They want to be a part of a community. And so it's giving them access to that. And so I hadn't heard that stat or that piece before about the mass exodus has not been happening in the private sector as much as the public sector. That makes sense, but I actually hadn't heard somebody say that before. And there's a lot of reasons I'm sure we could pull out for why, like you just mentioned, but there's that sense of also a higher calling of like the vision, the mission of what that school is specifically trying to be for and what they're fighting for. And those teachers and everybody's like, I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of helping those students that are a part of that.
I think we care for our people better. I mean, bureaucracies are designed to do a certain thing. My wife is just recently retired public school teacher. And if you were to ask her how well cared for she felt in her 27-year career, she would probably score it on a, scale of 4 to 6 out of 10. And I think it's easy to reduce care to compensation, but what we actually do is in school, in private schools, and especially faith-based schools, what we do that isn't done elsewhere is soul care. And when you're being thought of as more important than just what you produce in the classroom every day. And I think we had this really stark opportunity to demonstrate that we, hadn't had in the same acute fashion before.
Dang. Well, I love that things are going good, because I do see a lot of, people I know doom and gloom a lot of times people talk about, but I see a lot of good things happening in education right now. And I'm really excited for the future, both in the public sector as well as the private sector. I mean, I'm more excited about things that are happening in the Christian school space, because I've heard a lot of things from the guests we've had on, but I know there's some cool stuff happening in the public sector. Not everything I agree with on some of those things, but I am excited for where things are going. And I know there's also a huge push for the homeschool community, and hearing that the big push for that. I know my wife and I, that's what we're going to be doing with our son. And like, I was homeschooled my whole life, and it's exciting to hear about the push that homeschooling is having. I feel like I got this catapult when COVID happened of like people going, well, this isn't too bad. So now there's a huge piece of that. I don't know. There's just a lot of excitement. There's a lot of moving pieces. You got school choice stuff that's happening across the country. That's exciting. That's going on. So yeah, we could talk about challenges forever. We could talk about things that are going good. I feel like it is forever as well. But any, I guess, final thoughts on the things that are going really good piece before I ask you my final question?
Well, it's just exciting, having traversed, the last 15, 16 years in my role as a consultant, and having been in that really dark place in 2009-10, to be here is such an unexpected blessing and joy, because recession or whatever the next thing is, right? I think we're proving out in a different way why independent and parochial schools are necessary in our culture and to society.
I agree. Well, finish me off with this, man. I want a final quote from you, or a piece of advice that you would give to the school leaders that are listening. What's that piece that Chuck wants to share?
Oh man, this might sound trite, but I just say, put your whole self into it, and look at your school. Yes, it's a business. Yes, it's sort of a family business, but you can't do it halfsies. You got to put your whole self in, and the reciprocal benefit of that, especially to employees and maybe to board members as well. The reciprocal benefit of that to you is that you're gonna be blessed in tremendously unexpected ways, and look back or look forward in your service and just feel entirely fulfilled.
I love it. Well, if people want to get in touch with you, Chuck, what's the best way they can get in touch with you?
BetterSchools LLC.com.
All right. Perfect. Well, Chuck, appreciate all your time being on the podcast today. And since you've been doing this since 91, as you mentioned, so I appreciate all those years pouring in to the students, the schools, and all the things in education that you've been doing. And hope you still got another good 20, 30 years left in you. Okay. We got to keep we got a lot of work to do ahead of us. All right. But thank you so much for your time today, Chuck. I appreciate it.
All right, Mitchell.
Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Chuck for taking time and being on the podcast today. I love the things he shared. This part in the beginning, talking about the finances of a school and how I know schools can give away maybe too many discounts and it ends up hurting their school. And just having somebody to come in on the outside and to look at what your school is doing. That was just super good feedback right there. So hopefully those that are listening, you guys can take some of that to heart. And maybe it is hiring somebody like Chuck or somebody else to come in and be an outside person, like outside looking in, to give you guys some feedback on how your school's operating and what you guys maybe need to improve on. Obviously, that's kind of what we do on the marketing side of things for my company, Slater Strategies, where we come in and we look at the marketing side of things, like what's working, what's not. Is there room for improvement in the enrollment process? We just want to tighten things up and make sure people aren't falling through the cracks. And it's kind of what Chuck is talking about on that side when it comes to looking at the school and helping out with the financial part of it, and seeing where maybe things can be improved or tightened up on that side. So I love that feedback. And obviously, guys, this is what the podcast is for. It's for learning from others, seeing what they're doing, getting feedback from them that you guys can take back to your school to make your school better than it is right now. So I encourage you to keep tuning in. I'm going to continue to have new guests, new heads of school, new people in education, people who help schools. We're going to have all of it just so you guys can have more and more people pouring into you and making you better. We have a private Facebook group. You guys have probably heard this before, so make sure you go join that. School Success Makers on Facebook. That's School Success Makers on Facebook. I'm personally in there, and I'd love to see you in there as well. We also have a great resource in our website, schoolsuccessmakers.com, so go check that out. We are launching a newsletter later this fall called the School Success Report. We'd love you to sign up to start receiving those. The team is already working hard to getting those prepped and prepared, so would love you guys to sign up for that so you're getting those emails when they start this fall. And obviously the school years, it's coming up quick, guys. So get ready for that. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or ideas, please reach out to us on our website. Let us know if there's anything that we can do better, or maybe a specific guest that you guys would like to see on the podcast as well. And let's do another quick shout out too for our sponsors, America's Christian Credit Union. You guys heard the little spiel, but if you want to get connected with them, please check them out online, americaschristiancu.com/schools. That's americaschristiancu.com/schools. And we will be back here next week with another amazing guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.